Hello, everyone, and welcome. It is my joy and my delight for all of you to get the opportunity to meet Christian Lane, our new Interim Director of Music. I have known Chris for, gosh, I think about 15 years when I was a tiny little baby curate at Princeton, at Trinity Princeton, and Chris was known to hang out with us from time to time. It seems impossible that was 15 years ago.
It does indeed. I don't think it was quite 15. It was probably more like 13 or 14, but it does seem impossible that that much time has passed since those Princeton days, yes.
I I note that Chris has not aged, and yet I have. So we'll want to know
I
why.
certainly, I disagree, Henry. I certainly have aged.
Uh, so I first reached out to Chris to talk about music programs in churches in general. And as I was considering how we might move forward into an interim period, several colleagues of mine and friends of ours said, you know, you should be talking to Chris about seeing if you might be interested in coming and doing the interim job. And then that evolved into a conversation, which is evolved into your joining us for at least a year here at Emmanuel. I wondered if you might just take a couple of moments and talk about your background and you're coming from where, and tell us about you.
Well, as Anne-Marie knows, I grew up in Maryland. So this is somewhat of a homecoming, and it's quite remarkable because my parents have just retired. They just built their retirement home on the Chesapeake Bay on the western shore near Solomon's. And my baby brother, who had been living in Maine, is also just moving home to Maryland as well. So it's very weird because my brother and my parents, who had already been there, are now being invaded by myself and my brother, all within an hour's drive. So it's very strange and but delightful at the same time. Right now, I'm in Montreal, and I look forward to moving to Baltimore next week. And I've been here for 2 years. The most recent of the two, I've been serving as artist in residence for the Canadian competition, the Canadian International Organ Competition, of which there was actually a PBS film about that aired just last week. So if you would like to go search for the film Pipe Dreams, you can stream it through the next few weeks, I believe. But anyway, so we have been here in Montreal working together to promote the pipe organ through Canada. And my main role as artist in residence has been to travel throughout Canada to perform concerts, to kind of introduce communities of less access to quality classical music to the pipe organ, and to provide a concert for which they can come out. So this past year, I've been several places in small little towns in like New Brunswick or in Alberta, and play a concert for a relatively small community, but a lot of people come out and are introduced to the instrument. And then a year before that, here in Montreal, I was a visiting professor at McGill University, which is Canada's top music school and certainly best organ program. So it was a great privilege to have been asked to fill in for sabbatical coverage. And so now that these 2 years were finishing up, I had expected to return to Boston, where I lived for 10 years before. And Anne-Marie offered this beautiful opportunity to meet the community of Emmanuel, Baltimore. So I'm happy to be joining.
And it should be noted that you join a Canadian instrument here at Emmanuel. The Letourneau was, of course, built in Canada and was installed about 10 years ago. So we feel very connected to our northern neighbors. You can be a good
Certainly, yeah, and I know the folks at Litorno and Andrew Forrest. I had lunch with him before everything shut down, so it was nice to chat with him.
Yes, absolutely. Chris, tell us a little bit about your training, school, and other places that you have served along the way in what has really been not even close to anywhere near done, but a really fantastic career. So tell us what else.
Certainly. My primary schooling for collegiate conservatory was the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York. And then after 5 years there, I went to New York City and served for 2 years at St. Thomas Church, Fifth Avenue as the assistant organist, so the third organist, underneath of John Scott, who had just come to New York at that point from St. Paul's Cathedral in London. So St. Thomas, of course, is kind of the high point of the Anglican choral tradition in the U.S. No offense to any other institutions, but I think that's a generally regarded statement and fact. And after a couple years there, I continued back to school formally and went to Yale School of Music and Institute of Sacred Music, where I studied for a few more years. And then subsequently went from Yale to Harvard, which is kind of like a tricky thing to do in some circles. But for 6 years, served the church at Harvard as their primary organist. My title was associate. So.
When you were at Harvard, I remember because I was serving in Newport at the time. So were you at Harvard when you were in the competition in Montreal, the Canadian organ competition?
Exactly. So, yeah, I actually competed twice in the competition. The first time in 2008 when I first arrived to Harvard and was eliminated in the second round of the competition here, and then was encouraged to come back and do it again. And so 3 years later, the next time the competition happened, I went back. So I was still at Harvard at that point. And that time I won, which was unexpected, but a delight. So always.
I remember.
And then after I left Harvard,
I was just going to say,
no, I mean,
we were playing in that competition. There were a small group of us in Newport following along online for you.
Yeah, I guess my friend Brent Erstad would have been working for you at that point.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and then once I left Harvard, I actually spent a year in a formal interim position in Rhode Island. So even a little bit closer to Anne Marie in Newport at Grace Church Providence, where a very long tenured musician had left abruptly, and the program had kind of it was torn apart, and so we needed to kind of spend a year kind of laying the groundwork for kind of reestablishing a program and re-envisioning and having that opportunity, and then kind of did the same thing at a church in Brookline, Massachusetts over 3 years, again after a very long tenure. I mean, this was a planned departure in this case, but the incumbent unfortunately passed away, and so there was still a lot of emotions around his leaving, but then subsequently, shortly after leaving, tragically dying, that nearly 50 years of tradition, it was hard to kind of conceptualize how anything could possibly be different. So in Brookline, I spent 3 years essentially doing a long interim process with that parish, and then they hired somebody who you know quite well, who had formerly worked for Henry, Stefan, and he's now doing amazing work there. So that's my story in a nutshell.
Excellent. Notable that, yes, Stefan Griffin is there, a Baltimore native who went to Gilman.
Oh, he's from Baltimore too, isn't he? I forgot about that.
All roads lead back to Maryland in one way or another. It's my secret plan in this world to just gather us all to the great state of Maryland. So, Chris, you talked about these two interims that you did.
Mhm.
And I'll just reflect back to you that I was very good friends with the rector in Providence, still am. Jonathan is a wonderful priest. And he speaks so highly of that time as a time of visioning. And
Mhm.
one of the things that is great, and I hope you've kept track of this as well, is that investment of that year in planning and building and thinking and gathering in people's thoughts and visions now is bearing such amazing fruit. That
Yeah.
music program has taken off in just really wonderful ways. For me, that was one of the big encouragements of why an interim time can be so important uh,
Yeah.
in terms of going from strength to strength, from a strong music program to an even stronger music program.
Well, in Providence, they had gone into uh, uh, my interim period, and with the assumption that they would come out the back end with the program probably looking like it always had to them. Because it had been a really established program with a great chorister kind of program and adult choir and all types of things that were really well tailored to that church. And some really important people had grown up in that choir. Um,
Yeah.
and so they rightfully assumed that going forward, we would essentially reconstruct something that looked very similar to what they had had immediately preceding. Um, it turns out actually that through our conversations, they discovered that they had certain resources and certain strengths, and also certain aspirations as a community, as a parish, uh, to potentially kind of really invest in new and differing areas than they had preceding. Like immediately preceding when I arrived, there had been an adult choir, but their chorister program had really dried up. Um, and so they decided that they actually did want to reinvest in a chorister program, recognizing that music education in the schools in and around Providence wasn't as strong as it once had been, and that they had the resources and the ability to potentially fill a gap. And so they went out and got one of the best people in the country to start a chorister program essentially from scratch. And Vince Edwards, who is there, has been building this now for the past 5 years, and it's really thriving. But interestingly, he's focused so much of his effort on the kids, but in doing so, like he's created this environment where everybody else comes out of the woodwork too. So like the adult choir in that case has also grown tremendously with a wide range of ages present in the choir. And it's just tremendous what they've done. But the point is that it's nothing like what they envisioned that they would do uh, when we started having the conversation. And so while change is not a given in lots of scenarios, I think it's worth taking the time, and an interim period can be that time very conveniently, to just discern what a community uh, sees as its places of strength, sees as its places for opportunities, and to kind of think about how to chart a path to potentially get there.
I just think that's so wonderful. Um, and it ties in really well with where we are as a community of faith at Emmanuel. As you know, I've just been here a year, and the last 3 or 4 months of it have been a strange part of a year, but there it is. Uh, and we are the vestry, the wardens, the leadership is engaging now in with a consultant, and we will start work soon on an overall the whole parish. Uh, visioning process. I had a conversation the other day with someone who said, yeah, we've got to figure out, it's not a step-by-step plan, it's the big arrow. What's the big
Yeah.
direction that we're going? And so the opportunities to have the same visioning process integrated with the music program and the parish together,
Mhm.
I think that the possibilities of really great discoveries, discernment, to me that's exciting, to have not just one arm of the congregation doing something, but as my Greek professor used to say, all y'all, all of us at once. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. And of course, ultimately, a parish music program should not only support the liturgy, but also support the mission or the vision of the parish as a whole. And these two things should always be aligned. I think it goes without saying. So
But it's worth saying it, even though it may go
it's
without.
worth saying. It's worth saying. Sometimes we forget.
Yes. Well, you mentioned that you're coming back to the state in which you were raised. Is there any
Mhm.
particular Maryland event or delicacy or uh, something that you're looking forward to?
Well, I mean, it's really hard to get a proper crab cake pretty much anywhere else. So, I mean, in Boston or in Maine, like you get the Maine crab cakes, and it's not quite the same, as delicious as they might be. So I am looking forward to having more regular access to uh, Maryland crabs, which I quite enjoy. And I also like being by the water. I mean, one of the reasons that I have liked living in Montreal and also before in Boston is that I grew up on the water in Maryland, both on the bay and on the Potomac River, since I was, as my parents will probably show you a photo of sometime, like as an infant in a canoe in the middle of the Potomac. So, I mean, I really like being around the water, and I mean, Maryland has so many opportunities for water adventures as well.
Absolutely. Yes. And being a port city, we're right here in Baltimore. The water is, of course, always with us. Um,
Mm-hmm.
well, I just want to say that on behalf of the congregation, we are delighted to have you coming to be with us, and really looking forward to when we get to see you in person. We
Yes.
will be treated for the next 2 Sundays. Chris is recording while he's still in Montreal music for us for the 5th of July and the 12th of July. And then thereafter, we'll get to hear him play in Emmanuel on our beautiful organ. And then at some point, we will be able to regather for in-person worship. And we're planning for that now. Chris, I've shared with Chris some of our thoughts on planning, and we're working out how that can be done safely and with no rush. Uh, but Chris and I have talked a little bit about, and maybe Chris, you can share some thoughts about um, when we return. Speaking of things not being the same as they used to be, things will not be. We Emmanuel has for the last many years had a choir of about 12 or 14 singers. One of the things that is true about this virus is that singing is a super spreader activity, and in fact, our bishop has told us there no singing for the immediate future. But Chris, you've had some thoughts about other ways we can add music, different music to our liturgy and our lives together.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, first of all, yeah, singing right now is perceived to be a super spreader, and of course, we need to practice caution since we don't really know. But the reality also is that the science hasn't really been done to determine that. So we're hoping that the scientists will do some serious study of that, and I know in the UK they're moving in that direction to determine just how much singing is a contributor to spread. Because certainly there are anecdotal stories of mass choirs getting sick, like with huge numbers. But we can assume that part of that could have been from the singing, but it also could have been from the general socializing that happens in that setting as well. So fingers crossed we'll get back to normal singing sooner than later. But until we can, I think it's important to think about how worship is going to look, how the liturgy is going to look, because it's going to be, it's going to feel, it's going to be quite different without that communal act of singing together. And I think there are ways that we can experiment with kind of filling that, whether it be through having music played and having either a soloist sing on behalf of the assembly, having a speaker or some other kind of way to convey the text of music over top of instrumental music, or just have a quiet point of meditation where we take the poetry of a hymn, or we take the poetry of a canticle, an anthem, and we are just able to meditate in that space. Certainly those are ways that we could do it. I mean, we could also use technology to try to kind of sing communally yet not together, as many people are experimenting with these programs, using our iPhones, of course, to kind of combine a mass choir, yet everybody is separate. So, I mean, there are ways that we could do it. I think what's important is that we stay true to the beauty of the space and true to the beauty of the liturgy. And so, for me, those would be guiding principles. So we're not going to just try flashy things just to try them. But I think that to maintain the integrity of the experience as much as possible, even if we're missing that core communal choral or singing element.
Wow, it will be. I think it's going to take a great deal of creativity, and I'm looking forward to that, to collaborating with you and with the wider community and congregation. There are some really incredibly smart, talented people. I learn this again and again every time I really get to know someone in this community. Y'all are smart, y'all are talented, and I'm looking forward to the ways in which that we can draw out some of that, those gifts and talents and those wonders and dreams, and oh my gosh, what if we, and then think about whether we can, whatever that idea might be. Well, I'm going to say to you, thank you for joining us. We'll include this video in our weekly e-news, but we'll also put up a link to your website so people can learn more about you and read your CV in detail. But until you get here, safe packing and travels and all of that. We send you our prayers for a peaceful move. I've almost recovered from the trauma of our last move. I often tell the congregation that the reason that you don't have to worry about me leaving is because I don't have another move in me right now. So, but thank you for taking this time to introduce yourself. And Emmanuel, folks, Chris Lane, he's awesome. Welcome.
Thank you. No, I'm very much looking forward to joining you in next week. So looking forward to meeting everybody as soon as that's possible. So. So,
Great. Thanks so much, Chris.
pleasure. Bye.